Welcome, everyone. You're here with me on the Your Inspired Journey. I am excited to share this wisdom, the insights, the powerful coach that we have here on financial wellness. Her name is Jen Fontanilla, and she is really going to bring such great information in regards to how we can take all of this learning and apply it into our lives. Jen, I am so glad that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Carla. Such a pleasure.
Beautiful. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do, and then we're going to take it from there.
Absolutely. So I've been in financial services for over 15 years, but before that, I was actually a graphic designer. And what happened was, as I was sitting there at my desk, I was feeling this, that feeling you get in your stomach. You're like, something's not sitting right. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm making really great income. I'm in my early 20s. And I thought to myself, I went to college. I didn't learn anything about money in terms of how it works. How am I supposed to manage it? What am I supposed to do with it? I was pretty good about saving, but I knew there had to be more to it than just putting it in the bank, right? You get your paycheck, and now what? So I knew there was some kind of disconnect. And I thought to myself, if I feel this way, I can't imagine how many other people must feel this way. So that started the journey for me thinking, okay, I also happened to be working with another advisor at the time, but there was this feeling of like, oh, they're intimidating a little bit. I don't want to ask certain questions. It didn't feel comfortable. And so when I decided to go into this field myself, I remember saying to myself, I want people to be able to feel comfortable. They can ask questions. I can break it down. That was the big part too, being able to break it down so that it's very easy to understand, that it's not these concepts going over your head, right? So that's how I ended up going into this field. And then more towards the latter years, I transitioned from being a financial advisor that was working with retirement planning and all the technical stuff and products to more of the coaching side, where I really wanted to work with people on a foundational level. Because a lot of times people will say like, oh, I want to invest. And when I would look at the situation, I would see that they never did a budget. There was a lot of debt. There was like the foundation wasn't set, but yet they want to go here, right? They want to start at the investing side when the foundation wasn't there. And so I realized over the years, so many people need that foundation to be very, very solid before you can start building upon it. The other thing too is I really wanted to take people through a transformative change. It wasn't like, hey, let's just get you investing and then that was it. That didn't feel good for me. And I really wanted people to have something that was lasting and that was really setting them up for true success. And so I ended up going into the coaching space. And so that's where I'm at. And so I love working with emerging entrepreneurial women, not only working on managing their money, but especially their mindset, because it's so many things involved with that, right? So it's not, and I say this all the time, it is not just the numbers. This is not about just making a budget. This is not about cutting coupons. This is not about a spreadsheet. Yes, those things are important. Yes, we need to do those things, but that's just a tiny part of the whole thing. And then I even took it further and wanted to understand, how are our subconscious patterns affecting the way we make financial decisions? And I think that's something a lot of us have never really looked at sometimes, where we don't recognize, what did we learn from our mom? What did we learn from our dad? How did our childhood and growing up affect the way we decide how money's supposed to work in our lives? So that was another addition to how things are so different from, hey, let's just make a budget. I didn't want to just do that typical approach. And so that's what I do. I help people with that transition and understanding that, as well as being an author and a speaker.
Wow, that's fantastic. Isn't it interesting how, we would think it's just about the budget, but just like you were mentioning, Jen, it's more than the budget. And really that mindset is so important in connecting of how you are able to really adjust or meet the needs that you need to how you handle your money in your life.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
So do you see, when you said that you were a financial advisor, now that you are a coach, what do you see as the difference of how people approach you as a client?
It's different in the sense that as an advisor, there seems to be this idea that, okay, I need to invest. The focus seems to be more on the future planning. Okay, I need to invest. I need to start putting money away for the future, my 401k plan. What do I pick? What funds? It's very specific in terms of future planning, typically most of the time. But like I mentioned earlier, it's like, wait a minute, let's take a look at what's really going on, because I had to look at what everything is, what's on the table. Let's take a look at what we're working with here. You can't look at just one part of it in a very isolated way. And so that's probably one of the biggest differences. One is dealing more with the future and how do we save for that. Well, as opposed to coaching, it's a lot more involved. There's more of this, okay, what are some of the things that you've dealt with before? There's a lot more mindset involved. There's more setting goals into place. There's more of this, okay, I'm completely lost. What do I do? There's a different kind of hand holding. Whereas opposed to when I was an advisor, it wasn't really within the scope of what you do. So in actuality, what's really interesting is that I do not compete with financial advisors. You know, we actually could work really, really well together because I do the work that they don't really want to focus on. They want to, but it's not within the scope of what they do. And the advantage of working with me is that I was an advisor. So I understand their languaging. I understand what they do. I used to have the licenses. So that's where the difference is, where I'm holding their hand and looking at, let's look at the day-to-day. What are you doing today? How are you managing it? Because it's like a building block. If you don't have those habits, if you don't have the right mindset, you are not setting up that foundation correctly to build upon so that you can start doing the other things. Because it's a big checklist of stuff that we should have, we should be doing. But a lot of times, you know, we're not taught how to do this. So a lot of people come to me, they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Where do I start? And it's all over the gamut. You know, somebody could have a lot of debt, or somebody is investing, or they're saving, but they still got this feeling, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Am I on track? Am I doing this right? And so we take a look at all those things. And it could even be sometimes when I do the money coaching part, where I talk about the subconscious patterns and behaviors that people don't really pay attention to. I help them bring awareness and mindfulness to the situation so that they start to understand, oh my gosh, this is why I can't save. Oh my gosh, this is why I have such a bad relationship with money. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that that's why I cannot hang on to money, or why I don't want to spend it. And you know, as an advisor, you're not dealing with that kind of stuff as a financial advisor.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So you dig deeper into the mindset aspect of it. Elaborate a little bit about how you work with your client in the mindset realm of helping them, connecting that to why they may not be, you know, collecting, you know, a way of how they are using their money or how they're spending their money. How do you work with the mindset and connect that to money? I always thought that was interesting.
Yes, it actually is very fascinating. There's a lot of neuroscience behind a lot of the things, and a lot of psychology. So when I'm doing the money coaching, and so just to define it, so because sometimes in this industry, people use a lot of terms interchangeably. And so when I refer to the money coaching, I'm referring more to the psychology stuff, the mindset stuff, the subconscious patterns and those things. And when I say financial coaching, that's the stuff like, oh, spreadsheets, budget, all that stuff. So one of the processes, for example, that I take people through is that we analyze your money story or your money bio. And what that means is I have them write out from their earliest memory, what is the first encounter that you've had with money? It could be as simple as like, I remember my mom giving me $1 and we went to the store and I was able to buy candy with it. Or it could be, I remember when I was little and after school, my grandpa would let me, you know, would let me buy food. We could buy snacks, or, you know, they didn't allow me to do anything. I had to just eat whatever was there. So there's like some kind of memory, right? That's revolving around their interaction with money. So they list these things out. What's fascinating is as I'm analyzing it and I'm going through it with them, there are some patterns that you start to recognize. Oh, this is like shame. This guilt keeps coming up. Yes. Or you haven't forgiven that incident that happened when you were 16. So you start to see these patterns that either mom was imparting on you, or your dad, or whoever it was that you grew up with. And
Wow.
so when you start to see these patterns, you start to recognize, oh my gosh, this is probably where your guilt comes from and why you have a hard time accepting gifts, things like that. I know that was my case. There was an incident when I was 4 years old where my parents bought me a helium balloon. I was 4. It did not have the right cartoon character on it. It was Wonder Woman. I wanted strawberry shortcake. Every time I tell this story, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was such a brat. So I popped the balloon. I popped the balloon, and then I immediately felt guilt because I remember that, oh my gosh, they spent money on this, and I'm 4 years old, and I'm feeling. And I remember clearly it was in my bedroom in a different house at the time, and I popped the balloon. I'm sitting on the floor. I'm holding a safety pin. That's how I did it. I popped it and then I tore it, and I felt so bad. And from that point on, because I went through this process myself, so I know what it's like. And I remember that was the moment that there was this guilt. So I found out that this is why I have a hard time accepting gifts. This is why I have a hard time asking for help, especially financial help. Like, I will go as far as I can, and then it's like, why didn't I just ask for the help, especially even if it's being offered to me? There's this guilt about, I don't deserve this, I shouldn't do this because I was such a brat when I was little. And so it's things like that you don't realize. I mean, that's just one example. But I mean, you imagine 4 years old, I mean, all the way up into current times, anything could have happened. And you start to recognize, oh my gosh, that's where that came from. But when you have awareness of these different incidents that happen, that's how you're going to be able to change, like, the way your relationship is with money, the way you allow it to show up in your life, the way that you don't know and you're subconsciously like deflecting it. But until you do that kind of process, you're not really recognizing, like, why does this keep happening? You know, for example, you might have a friend, or, you know, you might have heard these words where somebody says, I don't know why I can't save. I'm making money and I get the paycheck and it's like, it's gone before, the paycheck's even here. And we have friends, and sometimes it's ourselves where we're like, why am I repeating this pattern over and over? Because we haven't stopped to recognize what is going on, where did it come from, and how do we bring awareness to it so that we can start doing the things that we need to change those actions.
This is why it's so important to have a coach, especially in things of that nature, because the word that you're mentioning, the recognizing and being aware, a lot of times a person like you would come into that person's life and be able to be able to share with them where these points, right, where these patterns are. So it is interesting how we can still have that connection to the past and don't want to let go of the past. And then it keeps making that repeat mistake. I don't want to say mistake, but you keep repeating the same pattern over and over until someone tells or be able to show you that, you know what, this is why you may be identifying these gaps in your financial future because of how you're seeing money or how you perceive money or how you're not accepting that money is supposed to come into your life. So that's interesting how you added the part about connecting, right? We're so connected to the past. How are you doing the reflection for that? So that's pretty, how do you move the person from getting that awareness, right? And then connecting them to a plan or the positivity, a way of connecting them to saying, this is how I need to move forth of how I handle money or how I connect to money or how I spend money.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting in this work is there are actually different archetypes. So similar to psychology. So an archetype is basically, here's an example. You all done this. Those online quizzes, right? You're like, okay, A, B, C, all of the above, and then you're like, oh, I wonder which one I'm going to end up being, right? Yeah. So there is a quiz that you can do. And so you go through this and then we find out, oh, these are the different archetypes that show up really predominantly strong in your situation. And then you see the ones that aren't so prevalent. So when you can find out which archetype is the one that you emulate, there's different characteristics, like, and it doesn't mean that that's the only one, but that, there's going to be some that are stronger than others. And so there's one where it's like the martyr or the fool. So like, for example, the martyr is the one that's always feeling bad, or they see these all the time where there's somebody that wants to give money away because they feel bad, even though it's to their detriment. You see things like that. Or the other archetype is the fool. And there's so many different characteristics under each archetype. It's very fascinating when you start to see like, oh my gosh, yeah, I have a little bit of that. Or, you know, the fool, for example, and that's not in a derogatory way, but it's like,
no, but exactly, to the, like, you're just spinning to a flaw, or you're giving to a flaw. Yeah,
that's just what it's called. And so, for example, like the fool would be somebody who's like, oh, we'll figure it out. I don't need a plan. You know, just, it's kind of like the YOLO mentality, right? And so it's like, no, you
only
can't
live once.
Exactly. And so you see these different characteristics. And so there's this one where it's called the magician. That's the ideal one that we want to work towards, where there's a good positive relationship with money. They have a healthy relationship with money. They believe that they're in control and they can create these opportunities. So when you start to see where you are and the characteristics that you want to emulate, we start to break down. And then, of course, also taking a look at the money story and the bio and things like that, and which patterns came from mom and dad. You start to ask yourself, okay, what small steps can we do to move from here to there? So, for example, I had a client who had a very interesting relationship with money. He had this feeling where, like, I'm not going to, you know, spend money. So he's constantly feeling like, okay, I can only shop at thrift stores. And we had a very fascinating, we had a fascinating conversation about this, because there's a lot of coaching out there where it seems like, let's uphold frugality, you know, oh, let's cut coupons. And I think there's a time and place for that. But when it starts to become, because I was even guilty of this too, this is why it was such a fascinating conversation to have with him. But when you start to get to a place where you're almost becoming, oh my gosh, can I penny pinch every single thing? You know, it made me stop and realize, like, wait a minute, there's so much information out there that's upholding, like, oh, let's be super, super frugal. And one thing I didn't like was like, wait a minute, that's so opposite of wanting to live in abundance.